Before his death, Thor Heyerdahl whispered a warning that still chills those who study his work. "Easter Island is not what it seems," he said, his voice heavy with fear and fascination. He claimed the island's silent statues were more than mere art. They were witnesses to something ancient and horrifying buried beneath the earth. What did Heyerdahl really uncover before he died? The answer may change everything we know about humanity's past. The mission to Rapa Nui. Thor Heyerdahl was born on October 6, 1914, in Larvik, Norway, into a family that valued both science and craftsmanship. His father was a master brewer, while his mother was deeply involved in the local museum and had a keen interest in nature and art. From an early age, Thor developed a deep curiosity about the world around him. He collected insects, plants, and small animals, and even created a small private museum in his family home. His fascination with nature and different cultures grew stronger with time, and it became clear that he was not a boy who would live an ordinary life. During his studies at the University of Oslo, Heyerdahl focused on zoology and geography, but his true interests went far beyond the classroom. He was fascinated by the mysteries of the Pacific and the origins of the Polynesian people. At the university, he came into contact with scholars and collectors who exposed him to ancient artifacts and theories about human migration. One of the most influential figures in his early life was the businessman and collector Martinus Christian Kropelian, whose private collection of Polynesian artifacts deeply impressed Heyerdahl. These encounters planted a question in his mind that would guide his life's work. Could the great civilizations of the past have been connected by the oceans long before modern explorers set sail? Heyerdahl's answer to that question came not through books, but through daring experiments. He believed that ancient people had greater seafaring skills than historians were willing to admit. To prove this, he decided to recreate their journeys. In 1947, he built a primitive balsa wood raft, named it Kon-Tiki, and sailed from Peru across the Pacific Ocean. Many experts said the voyage would fail, but after 101 days at sea, Heyerdahl and his crew reached the Polynesian Islands. The successful expedition showed that it was at least possible for people from South America to have reached the islands thousands of years earlier using simple technology. Later, he repeated similar experiments with papyrus boats named Ra and Tigris, sailing across the Atlantic and Arabian seas to demonstrate how ancient cultures might have been linked. These voyages shaped his worldview. Heyerdahl became convinced that Polynesia had been influenced by ancient South American cultures. He argued that similarities in statues, carvings, and legends were not coincidences but evidence of contact between the two regions. Most scholars dismissed his ideas as romantic or unscientific, yet Heyerdahl was not easily discouraged. He wanted to find solid archaeological proof. In 1955, he gathered a team of scientists, artists, and local workers for what became the Norwegian archaeological expedition to Easter Island, known as Rapa Nui. They converted a Greenland fishing trawler into an expedition ship and sailed into one of the most remote places on Earth. Heyerdahl hoped to uncover traces of a forgotten civilization, perhaps the very people who carved the island's mysterious stone giants, the Moai. He wanted to test whether South Americans might have reached Rapa Nui long before Europeans did. You would be surprised to know what shocking discoveries awaited him in the first trenches on Easter Island. Discoveries that would shake the foundations of conventional archaeology. The first smoking guns. When Thor Heyerdahl and his team arrived on Easter Island in 1955, they were determined to find evidence that could prove his daring theory. He believed that long before European explorers reached the Pacific, people from South America had already sailed there and influenced the culture of Rapa Nui. The island's famous stone statues, the Moai, were only part of the mystery. Heyerdahl wanted to look deeper, literally and figuratively, by excavating the land itself to uncover what stories it might still be hiding beneath the soil. His team began their work at several key sites. At Rano Raraku, the volcanic quarry where the Moai were carved, they uncovered not only half-buried statues, but also unusual tools and artifacts that did not entirely fit the traditional Polynesian style. Nearby, at Punapau, the red scoria quarry where the Moai's stone topknots were made, more tools and carvings were found. Some of them showed patterns and shapes that reminded Heyerdahl of designs from ancient South America. He began to see what he called fingerprints of a forgotten culture. Further exploration took them to Orongo, a ceremonial village on the edge of a high cliff overlooking the ocean. Here, they found stone houses built with overlapping slabs, a construction technique that looks strangely similar to that found in parts of Peru and Bolivia. The team also explored numerous cave sites where they discovered tombs, wall carvings, and stone chambers that bore a striking resemblance to pre-Inca and Andean styles. To Heyerdahl, these similarities were not coincidences. He believed they hinted at a shared cultural origin between the ancient people of the Andes and the mysterious first inhabitants of Easter Island. One of the most intriguing finds came from a trench near a cliff that local legends described as the site of a great massacre. The team unearthed layers of burned soil, ashes, and pieces of charred wood. When these samples were later tested, they were found to date back to around AD 1676. This timeline matched the oral stories passed down by islanders about a terrible war between two groups, the Long Ears and the Short Ears. The Long Ears were said to be taller, lighter-skinned, and red-haired, while the Short Ears eventually rose against them and wiped them out in a fiery revolt. In another area, Heyerdahl's team discovered the remains of what appeared to be a large moat cut into the rock. The features seemed to match local tales of defenses built by the Long Ears before their downfall. To Heyerdahl, this was the final clue confirming his belief that the island had once been ruled by an older, foreign race that came from South America and was later destroyed in a violent uprising. Let's now tell you the most horrific discovery of all, the terrifying truth theory. Among the most haunting legends of Easter Island is the story of the Hanau Ipe and the Hanau Momoko. The tale speaks of two peoples, the Long Ears and the Short Ears. According to oral tradition, the Long Ears were a ruling class with light or reddish hair, taller and fairer than the Polynesian settlers who came later. They were said to have arrived first, bringing new skills in stonework and organization, but they ruled with cruelty. The Short Ears, darker and smaller in number, were forced to labor under their masters, carving and hauling the great Moai statues that would one day outlive both peoples. For generations, this uneasy peace endured until resentment erupted into a violent rebellion that would forever scar the island's history. The story tells of a night drenched in blood and fire. The Short Ears rose against their oppressors, slaughtering them in their sleep, burning their homes, and driving survivors toward a stone trench. Those who resisted were thrown into the flames. Children screamed as warriors hacked through the dark with sharpened obsidian blades. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. According to legend, only 2 Long Ears escaped, vanishing into the forests, never to be seen again. When Thor Heyerdahl heard this tale, he believed it was more than folklore. He saw in it a clue to a forgotten chapter of human history. To him, the Long Ears were not native Polynesians, but foreigners from South America who had crossed the Pacific long before European explorers dared to sail such distances. He believed they brought the knowledge to build the Moai and the tools to shape their massive stone altars. The Short Ears, he thought, were later Polynesian arrivals who rebelled and wiped out their masters in an act of desperate liberation. During his Norwegian archaeological expedition, Heyerdahl and his team uncovered chilling evidence that seemed to match the legends. Near the volcanic crater of Rano Raraku, they unearthed a trench-like moat carved deep into the rock. Inside it were layers of ash, burned soil, and traces of wooden fragments. Carbon dating placed the fire in the late 17th century, the exact era that oral histories describe the final battle. Heyerdahl called this discovery the smoking gun. He painted a grim picture of an island consumed by war, of a society that turned against itself. He argued that the terrifying truth of Easter Island's downfall was not environmental collapse, but genocide. The Moai, he believed, stood as silent witnesses to the slaughter that followed, a once powerful civilization erased in fire and blood. His interpretation sent shockwaves through archaeology and the public alike. But were these artifacts truly genuine signs of an ancient link, or were they misunderstood, even manipulated? And what lengths would defenders of traditional archaeology go to in order to protect their narrative? Let's find out. The Cave Carvings Controversy. As Thor Heyerdahl's excavation on Easter Island gained attention, so did the doubts surrounding his methods. Among the most debated pieces of evidence were the mysterious cave carvings he presented as proof of early South American influence on the island. To Heyerdahl, these carvings were a direct window into the past, showing images of reed boats and other symbols that he believed only a people from South America could have created. He argued that the local Polynesian descendants could not have carved such designs because they had no tradition of reed boat construction. To him, this was the missing link that confirmed contact between Rapa Nui and the ancient cultures of Peru. However, not everyone was convinced. Soon after the publication of Heyerdahl's findings, local islanders and later investigators began to question the authenticity of some of the carvings. Several claim that some of the so-called ancient designs had been created during or shortly before Heyerdahl's expedition. According to reports published years later, some islanders had admitted that members of Heyerdahl's team encouraged or even paid them to carve certain images that would appear ancient. One of the most striking examples involved an islander named Pedro Pete. During Heyerdahl's expedition, a cave was discovered that contained what looked like an old carving of a reed boat, something that fit perfectly with Heyerdahl's theory. The discovery made headlines, and Heyerdahl proudly showcased it as undeniable proof that South American sailors had once reached the island. But years later, Pedro Pete confessed that he had carved the image himself after being offered money. He explained that he thought the visitors simply wanted a souvenir and did not realize how significant the carving would become in their research. This revelation cast a shadow over Heyerdahl's work. Critics began to argue that he had been too eager to prove his ideas and may have ignored signs that some of the evidence was unreliable. Others accused him of selectively using data that supported his theory while dismissing findings that contradicted it. Some even suggested that he might have encouraged a bit of staging to make his discoveries more dramatic and convincing. The debate exposed a deep divide between scientific precision and the desire for a powerful story. Heyerdahl saw himself as a truth seeker who used daring experiments to challenge rigid academic thinking, while his critics viewed him as a romantic adventurer who blurred the line between fact and fiction. The controversy around the cave carvings became one of the most haunting parts of his legacy. Let's now explore how modern archaeology, DNA testing, and new technology have challenged, and in some cases reshaped, Heyerdahl's dramatic account. Pushback, DNA, and new discoveries. In the years following Thor Heyerdahl's bold theories, the scientific world pushed back with growing force. While his adventures captured public imagination, experts began to argue that his conclusions about South American origins were built on selective evidence rather than solid science. The rise of new research in archaeology, linguistics, and genetics offered a very different story, one that placed Easter Island firmly within the grand journey of Polynesian expansion. By the late 20th century, most scholars supported the idea that Polynesians were master navigators who spread across the Pacific from Southeast Asia. This vast migration, known as the Austronesian expansion, connected people from Taiwan and the Philippines all the way to New Zealand and Hawaii. These sailors carried similar languages, crops, and cultural traditions wherever they went. When they finally reached the isolated shores of Rapa Nui, they brought with them their skills in navigation, stone carving, and agriculture. Critics of Heyerdahl accused him of cherry-picking evidence to fit his theory. He had ignored linguistic studies showing clear Polynesian roots in the Rapa Nui language. He also dismissed oral histories that connected the island's ancestors to other Polynesian islands. Even the physical features he described, such as red hair or tall stature, could easily be explained by natural variation among Polynesian populations. Modern DNA and isotopic studies provided the most decisive blow to Heyerdahl's ideas. Genetic testing of both ancient and modern Rapa Nui remains revealed overwhelmingly Polynesian ancestry. No sign of a large South American migration appeared in the data. However, science did find something intriguing: small traces of South American genetic markers. These traces suggest limited contact between the two regions, possibly through occasional voyages or trade exchanges rather than conquest or colonization. Some plants, such as the sweet potato, native to South America, were found across Polynesia long before European contact, hinting that some form of trans-Pacific contact may indeed have taken place. Later expeditions also re-examined the artifacts and carvings Heyerdahl used to support his theory. Many of these items were found to be misdated or misinterpreted. The supposed ancient carvings showing reed boats turned out, in some cases, to have been created by locals during Heyerdahl's stay, influenced by his own suggestions. Despite this, researchers acknowledged that Heyerdahl's work had inspired valuable new investigations into the island's history and forced scholars to question long-held assumptions. In 2024, a symbolic event closed one chapter of Heyerdahl's legacy. Artifacts and human remains collected by his team and stored in the Kon-Tiki Museum were finally returned to Rapa Nui. The repatriation reflected a broader effort to heal the wounds caused by colonial-era excavations and to give the islanders back ownership of their heritage. Although Heyerdahl's grand story of a South American race ruling Easter Island has been rejected, his daring curiosity still leaves a shadow of mystery. What if he recorded something in private? Notes, samples, or photographs that never reached the public? Could those hidden materials, if uncovered, reveal that part of his vision was not entirely wrong? Hidden data, private journals, and the last wonders. In the final years of his life, Thor Heyerdahl remained both celebrated and controversial. His name had become legendary because of his daring expeditions and bold claims. Yet even as he faced criticism from scholars, some close to him believed that he never fully shared everything he had discovered. This belief gave rise to a question that still lingers today. Did Heyerdahl leave behind private notes, letters, or data that might hold a final clue about Easter Island? Researchers who have studied Heyerdahl's personal papers note that his archives contain hundreds of pages of field notes, sketches, and correspondence, much of which has never been publicly analyzed. Some of these were kept in private collections in Norway and at the Kon-Tiki Museum in Oslo. Rumors circulated among his colleagues that before his death in 2002, he confided certain details about his findings to his family and a few trusted friends. These alleged comments, if true, hinted that he had come across evidence that complicated his earlier theories. Family members have occasionally mentioned that Heyerdahl spoke differently in private than in public. While his books and lectures defended the idea of South American influence, his late conversations reportedly suggested a growing acceptance of a more complex reality. According to one colleague, he once said that Easter Island might have been a meeting point rather than a colony, a crossroads where South American travelers and Polynesians exchanged ideas. Such remarks never appeared in his published works, leaving scholars to wonder whether he softened his stance privately but never dared to revise his theory openly. There are also scattered reports of sealed letters or notes written during his final expeditions. Some of these were said to include maps and diagrams of sites he wanted to revisit but never could. If these documents exist, they may hold hints about locations or artifacts that were never studied in depth. Historians who have examined fragments of his notes found several references to unusual layers and fire lines beneath certain Moai platforms. These remarks, vague as they are, could suggest further evidence of conflict or ritual destruction that aligns with his earlier terrifying truth theory. If such hidden writings were ever discovered, they could potentially change how we understand Heyerdahl's work. Imagine finding a lost journal entry where he reinterpreted the data from his last excavations. Perhaps he wrote that both stories, the Polynesian and the South American, were true in part. Maybe travelers from the East and West both reached the island, merging cultures over centuries. Such a finding would not only rewrite Heyerdahl's legacy, but also reshape how we view ancient human movement across oceans. The fascination with Easter Island has never faded. Movies, documentaries, and books continue to explore the mysteries of the Moai statues and the civilization that carved them. Heyerdahl's theory, though largely rejected by academia, helped fuel decades of debate. It inspired fringe theories, myths about lost races, and countless online discussions. For many, his terrifying truth remains symbolic, a reminder of how civilizations can destroy themselves through conflict, pride, or isolation. Beyond the myths, modern archaeology is entering a new era. The ethical dimension of Heyerdahl's work is being re-examined. The 2024 repatriation of artifacts from the Kon-Tiki Museum marked a powerful moment of respect toward the Rapa Nui people. Local authorities now play a larger role in managing their heritage, ensuring that future discoveries are handled with care and fairness. Meanwhile, new tools are transforming the search for answers. Techniques like ancient DNA analysis, LiDAR scanning, drone mapping, and sediment studies are uncovering clues invisible to the naked eye. Scientists hope that these technologies might one day reveal whether contact between Polynesia and South America truly occurred before Europeans arrived. If a hidden shipwreck, a buried village, or ancient DNA from a South American lineage is found, it could reopen the entire debate. Heyerdahl began more than 70 years ago, so the question remains: did Thor Heyerdahl come closer to the truth than his critics admit? Or was his terrifying truth a beautiful fiction born from imagination, adventure, and the hunger to make history? Perhaps the answer still lies buried in a forgotten notebook, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. So, what do you think about Thor Heyerdahl's truth about Easter Island? Was he a visionary who uncovered something the world wasn't ready to believe? Or was his terrifying truth simply a story woven from passion and imagination? Share your thoughts in the comments below.